Alexander Thorne's fist connected with Noah Shepard's face, the impact echoing through the elegant ballroom. Crystal glasses trembled on nearby tables. The orchestra's melody faltered. Women gasped. Phones emerged from designer purses and tailored pockets, their cameras aimed at the shocking scene unfolding at the Westbrook Foundation's annual charity gala. "Keep your religious nonsense to yourself," Alexander snarled, adjusting the cufflinks on his custom-tailored tuxedo as Noah staggered backward. Blood trickled from the corner of Noah's mouth, staining the collar of his modest blue suit. "People like you shouldn't even be at events like this." Nadi. Noah Shepard was 36 years old and had never imagined that accepting an invitation to help at a charity fundraiser would end with him being assaulted by one of Boston's most influential business leaders. The metallic taste of blood spread across his tongue as he regained his balance, his hazel eyes maintaining a disturbing calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos erupting around them. It had all started 20 minutes earlier when Noah had approached Alexander's table with information about the Children's Hospital building project the gala was supporting. The security team, following Alexander's standing instructions about religious types, had initially tried to redirect him. When Noah had politely persisted, explaining he was only sharing information about the hospital project as requested by the organizers, the situation had quickly escalated. "You know exactly what I mean," Alexander had said, rising from his chair with an arrogance that made his entourage shrink back. "I donate millions to scientific research every year. The last thing this hospital project needs is someone pushing their fairy tales on vulnerable families. Take your Bible and your judgment somewhere else." Now, with half the city's elite recording and Alexander still ranting to onlookers about protecting rational discourse from superstitious infiltrators, Noah simply dabbed at the blood on his lip with a white handkerchief. His eyes revealed a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered far worse storms and knew precisely how to navigate them. What no one in that gilded ballroom could have possibly imagined was that this seemingly ordinary man, in his unassuming blue suit, carried a secret too consequential to be revealed before the perfect moment. And Alexander Thorne, in his blind arrogance, had just committed the most catastrophic miscalculation of his entire existence. Alexander couldn't stop smiling as he straightened his bow tie, feeling like a crusader for reason in front of the growing crowd of Boston's wealthiest and most powerful. The circle of onlookers expanded by the second. Phones captured every moment of the humiliation he had orchestrated with such evident satisfaction. "Did you all see that?" he asked loudly, gesturing toward Noah, who was still dabbing at his bloodied lip. "This is exactly how we should respond when these religious zealots try to infiltrate our civic institutions. The Westbrook Foundation is dedicated to scientific advancement, not supernatural fantasy." Gerald, the event's head of security, a man in his 50s with silver hair at his temples, looked at the polished floor with unmistakable discomfort. He had worked these high society functions for 18 years and had never witnessed anything so unnecessarily brutal. "Mr. Thorne," Gerald attempted to intervene discreetly, "perhaps we should handle this situation more—" "More what?" Alexander cut him off irritably. "More diplomatically," Gerald finished quietly. "Diplomatically?" Alexander scoffed. "Gerald, you should be thanking me for protecting the integrity of this event. Look at him." He gestured dramatically toward Noah. "Worn shoes, off-the-rack suit, that little crosspin on his lapel. I just saved us all from another sermon about how we should spend our money on churches instead of medical research." Noah remained standing in the same spot, his handkerchief pressed gently against his injured face, but his eyes revealed something that bothered Gerald profoundly. It wasn't anger, humiliation, or even fear. It was an almost disturbing tranquility, as if this situation were merely a minor detour in a much more meaningful journey. What no one there knew was that Noah Shepherd had grown up in one of Boston's most dangerous neighborhoods, where simply surviving to adulthood was considered remarkable. At 14, he had learned that confrontations weren't won with fists, but with wisdom. At 19, he had discovered that the most formidable individuals were often the quietest. And at 25, when he received his first medical school acceptance letter, he had promised himself that he would never allow meaningless violence to determine his path. "You know what irritates me the most?" Alexander continued performing for the phones recording him, clearly intoxicated by the attention. "It's that self-righteous confidence. He really thought he could walk into my conversation, peddle his Christian agenda under the guise of charity work, and I would just smile and nod at the deception." An elderly woman in an elegant emerald gown shook her head disapprovingly. "Young man, there was absolutely no need to strike him. He wasn't doing anything threatening." Alexander laughed dismissively. "Madam, with all due respect, you don't understand how these people operate. They infiltrate legitimate scientific and humanitarian organizations, then gradually redirect resources toward their religious agendas. We have to protect our institutions from this kind of subversion." It was at that moment that Noah finally spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made several of the onlookers lean forward to hear more clearly. "Mr. Thorne," Noah said, pronouncing the name with a precision that made Alexander frown slightly. "Are you aware that this entire incident is being recorded for the Foundation's social media channels? Is this the image you want the Westbrook Foundation to project to its supporters?" The question caught Alexander off guard. How did this man know about the Foundation's live social media coverage? He hadn't mentioned it, and the camera crew was positioned discreetly in the corner of the ballroom. "How do you know about the live stream?" Alexander asked, a slight note of uncertainty coloring his arrogant voice for the first time. Noah simply smiled, and it was a smile that made Gerald take a step back. It wasn't a smile of submission or fear. It was the smile of someone who had just watched his opponent make precisely the mistake he had been anticipating. "Let's just say I make it a habit to understand the environments I enter," Noah replied calmly. "Especially when those environments involve organizations whose reputations can be affected by the behavior of their key supporters." Alexander felt an uncomfortable chill travel up his spine, but he quickly dismissed the sensation. This was absurd. He was Alexander Thorne, founder and CEO of Thorne Biotechnologies, one of the most respected scientific innovators in the country. This man was obviously some minor hospital staff member or volunteer trying to intimidate him with empty words. "You don't frighten me," Alexander said, but his voice had lost some of its previous conviction. "And if you think you can threaten me after interrupting my conversation with potential donors, you're sorely mistaken. Gerald, call the police. I want this man removed from the premises immediately." But Gerald didn't move. Something in Noah's demeanor had activated all the warning systems he had developed over decades of working in security, and those instincts were screaming that Alexander Thorne had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside Noah that his aggressor couldn't perceive, a quiet resilience fueled by the very injustice Alexander sought to impose. What Alexander couldn't imagine was that every insult, every contemptuous gesture, was being carefully catalogued in the mind of a man who had transformed patience into a precision instrument through years of meticulous discipline. The crowd around them had grown considerably, with elegantly dressed attendees abandoning their tables to witness the confrontation unfolding in the center of the ballroom. Alexander felt increasingly confident with all the attention, interpreting the curious glances as approval of his exemplary conduct. "Gerald, you heard what I said," Alexander repeated with mounting irritation. "Call the police now. This man clearly represents a disruption to our event." But before Gerald could respond, Noah calmly removed his phone from his jacket pocket. The gesture was so natural and unhurried that it made Alexander frown with renewed discomfort. "Excuse me," Noah said politely, dialing a number. "I need to make a quick call." "You're not calling anyone," Alexander erupted, attempting to grab the phone from Noah's hand. "Enough of this charade. Security, security." Noah simply took a half step back, keeping the phone out of Alexander's reach, and spoke with a calmness that made several people in the crowd lean in to hear better. "Hello, Victoria. It's Noah. Yes, I'm at the Westbrook Foundation Gala right now. Actually, I'm having a rather uncomfortable situation here with Alexander that I thought you might want to know about." He paused, listening to the response on the other end of the line, while Alexander grew increasingly flushed with anger. "Victoria?" Alexander asked loudly, attempting to intimidate. "Who the hell is Victoria? Your wife, your colleague? Is someone coming to rescue you?" Noah smiled again with that unsettling serenity. "Victoria Thorne. I believe you two know each other rather well, Alexander. She mentioned that you had dinner together just last night." The name hit Alexander like a thunderbolt. Victoria Thorne had been his wife for 12 years, the brilliant research director at their company's foundation. "You don't know my wife," Alexander said, but his voice had lost all its previous conviction. "That's impossible." "Noah, sweetheart, where are you?" A woman's voice called across the ballroom. "I just finished my presentation," and the voice drew closer. Alexander turned toward it and felt his legs nearly buckle beneath him. Walking purposefully toward them was Victoria Thorne, his wife, wearing the stunning burgundy gown he had complimented that very evening. Her green eyes flashed with a mixture of concern and something Alexander had never witnessed before: cold fury. "Victoria," Alexander stammered, completely disoriented. "What are you doing here? How do you know this?" "And this?" Victoria reached Noah's side and without hesitation embraced him warmly, an action that sent murmurs of surprise rippling through the assembled crowd. "Are you all right? You sounded upset on the phone." She stopped speaking when she noticed the cut on Noah's lip and the redness spreading across his jaw. "Who did this to you?" Victoria asked, her voice quiet, but filled with an authority that made several onlookers instinctively step back. Noah calmly gestured toward Alexander, who stood frozen, his mind visibly struggling to process the impossibility of what he was witnessing. "Alexander Thorne, CEO of Thorne Biotechnologies," Noah said, as if making formal introductions at a business meeting. "He decided my faith made me unwelcome at this gathering and expressed that opinion with his fist." Victoria slowly turned to face her husband, and Alexander felt his entire world disintegrating around him. The expression on his wife's face was that of someone seeing a complete stranger for the first time. 12 years, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. 12 years of marriage, and I thought I knew the man I married. "Victoria, you don't understand," Alexander began desperately. "This man was pushing his religious agenda at our scientific fundraiser. I was simply protecting our company's reputation." "Protecting?" Victoria interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Protecting from what? From the man who saved my brother's life last year?" Gerald, who had watched the entire interaction with growing concern, finally found his voice. "Mrs. Thorne, if I may, your husband attacked this gentleman without provocation. I witnessed everything. Dr. Shepard was simply sharing information about the Children's Hospital project as instructed by the Foundation." "Hey, who asked for your opinion, Gerald?" Alexander snapped, but his authority had completely evaporated. "You work for the event. You should be on my side." "Actually," a new voice joined the conversation, "he works for the Westbrook Foundation, which has a long-standing partnership with Thorne Biotechnologies." A distinguished-looking woman approached, her name badge identifying her as Diana Westbrook, the Foundation's chairperson. "And we've just received numerous alerts about an assault taking place at our gala." Noah watched the scene unfold with the patience of someone who had anticipated every development. Victoria moved closer to him, her hand finding his with a familiarity that made Alexander swallow hard. Alexander, Victoria said, her voice now measured and controlled. You assaulted Dr. Noah Shepherd. Dr. Noah Shepherd, who led the surgical team that saved Jonathan's life last year. Dr. Noah Shepherd, who has been my friend and spiritual advisor for the past 3 years. Each revelation landed like a physical blow, and Alexander felt his reality fracturing. The pieces were beginning to align in a terrible, inevitable pattern. But he was so... Alexander began, but stopped as he realized every word only deepened his predicament. So what, Alexander? Victoria asked. So humble? So modestly dressed? So compassionate? Tell me, what terrible crime did he commit other than being a man of faith who wears a simple crosspin on his lapel? The crowd around them had grown even larger, and numerous people were now openly recording, capturing every moment of Alexander's humiliation. Diana Westbrook was speaking quietly into her phone, clearly summoning additional security. Noah finally spoke again, his voice maintaining that unnatural calm that had characterized the entire interaction. Alexander, when you prevented me from sharing information about the hospital project today, and particularly when you chose to resort to physical violence, you made 2 critical misjudgments. Alexander stared at him, unable to speak. First, Noah continued, you assumed that my faith somehow disqualified me from contributing to scientific and medical advancement. Second, you assumed I lacked the connections or capability to defend myself. He paused, allowing the words to register. Both assumptions were profoundly mistaken. Victoria squeezed Noah's hand, and Alexander could see years of genuine friendship and mutual respect in that simple gesture. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, about his own life, was being rewritten before his eyes. What you don't know, Alexander, Noah said quietly, is that while you were building Thorn Biotechnologies into a corporate giant, I was building the Shepherd Neurological Institute. Victoria and I have collaborated on research for years. She was instrumental in helping me secure funding for my first research facility. I helped save her brother's life when he needed emergency surgery last year. He looked directly into Alexander's eyes. And 3 years ago, when Victoria was questioning her purpose in life, she came to my church. Not because I invited her, but because she was searching for meaning beyond the laboratory. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. The woman he had been married to for 12 years had been on a spiritual journey he knew nothing about, guided by the very man he had just publicly humiliated and assaulted. But as Alexander struggled to process this devastating information, Noah made a move no one expected. He took a small digital recorder from his pocket and switched it off with an audible click. "Victoria," Noah said calmly, "do you remember that conversation we had about documenting instances of religious discrimination in scientific institutions for the Hospital Ethics Committee? Well, I've just collected a particularly illuminating example. It was when the nervous laughter died away that something unexpected began to take form, not just in the room, but primarily in the determined expression that now shone with an intensity that made several onlookers realize something extraordinary was about to happen. The digital recording that Noah had so casually deactivated seemed to echo in the tense silence that settled over the ballroom. Alexander felt cold perspiration trickling down his back as he processed the magnitude of what he had just discovered. He had assaulted not just any man of faith, but one of Boston's most respected neurosurgeons, a man who happened to be his wife's spiritual mentor and friend. "Victoria," Alexander stammered, attempting to regain some control of the situation, "you can't be serious. This man, he disrupted our fundraiser. He was pushing his religious agenda on our donors." "Pushing," Victoria interrupted, her voice dangerous. "Noah, please tell everyone exactly how you were pushing your agenda when Alexander assaulted you." Noah simply gestured to the information packet still clutched in his hand. Standard materials about the Children's Hospital building project that all volunteers had been asked to distribute. The physical evidence contradicting Alexander's claims was undeniable, captured by dozens of phone cameras that continued recording. 12 years, Alexander, Victoria repeated, her voice now trembling with contained emotion. 12 years I've listened to you talk about intellectual honesty, about following evidence wherever it leads, about respecting different perspectives. She paused, looking around at the gathered crowd. And in a single moment, you've revealed who you truly are. Diana Westbrook approached, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers who had just arrived. Mr. Thorne, we need to discuss the assault that was reported. Alexander felt the world spinning around him. You don't understand. I'm Alexander Thorne. I've donated millions to this foundation. I have responsibilities, authority. Had. A new voice cut through the air. An imposing man in his 60s approached the group. His presence commanded immediate respect, and even in the curious crowd, people respectfully made way for him. Dr. Whitfield, Alexander said, his voice emerging as a strangled whisper. James Whitfield was the Commissioner of Public Health for Massachusetts and Chairman of the Hospital Board, his direct partner in several major medical initiatives. Alexander, Dr. Whitfield said, his voice as cold as January in Boston. I've just received multiple calls about an incident involving one of our most generous supporters assaulting Dr. Shepard in public. He gestured toward the phones, still recording. An incident that apparently is being broadcast live across most of Boston's medical community. Noah stepped forward, extending his hand to Whitfield with a smile that made Alexander's stomach sink even further. James, Noah said warmly, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under more pleasant circumstances. Whitfield shook Noah's hand with genuine respect and undisguised concern. Noah, my God, are you all right? When I heard that someone had assaulted you. Alexander watched in growing horror as the health commissioner treated Noah like a valued colleague. No, as someone higher in both the social and professional hierarchy. Dr. Whitfield, Alexander tried desperately to intervene. You don't understand the situation. This man was disrupting our fundraiser with religious rhetoric. He was being quiet, Whitfield growled, turning to Alexander with a fury that made several people around them recoil. You just publicly assaulted Dr. Noah Shepard. Dr. Noah Shepard, Alexander. The name was spoken with such reverence and horror that it caused murmurs of confusion to ripple through the crowd. Who was Noah Shepard that he deserved such a reaction? Noah maintained his composed expression, but Victoria could see the hint of amusement in his eyes. He was clearly not taking pleasure in Alexander's downfall, but there was an undeniable satisfaction in seeing truth revealed. Alexander, Whitfield continued, his voice shaking with controlled anger. You assaulted the chief of neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital, the man who pioneered the surgical technique that saved your father-in-law's life last year, the doctor who volunteered for 6 months in war zones when he could have been making millions in private practice. He paused to let that sink in. The man whose research your own company has been trying to partner with for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt his legs weaken, and he gripped a nearby chair to prevent himself from collapsing. Impossible, Alexander muttered. He's dressed like a humble man doing volunteer work on his evening off, Noah suggested gently. Strange concept, isn't it, Alexander? Gerald, the security guard who had witnessed everything, finally found his courage. Dr. Shepard, I'm so sorry. If I had known who you were... Noah turned to Gerald with a genuinely kind smile. Gerald, you have nothing to apologize for. In fact, you've demonstrated more professionalism and integrity in the last 15 minutes than some others have shown in their entire careers. Diana Westbrook was typing frantically on her phone. I need to contact our board immediately. Dr. Shepard, please tell me we can resolve this situation. Diana, Noah said calmly, I'm not a vindictive person, but Alexander didn't just physically assault me. He did so based purely on prejudice against people of faith in public while representing your foundation. This isn't just about me. It's about the message the Westbrook Foundation is sending about inclusion and respect. Victoria watched her husband unraveling in real time. The man she had been married to for 12 years was revealing aspects of his character she had never fully acknowledged, or perhaps had never wanted to see. "Alexander," she said softly, "Noah isn't just my friend. He's the reason Jonathan is still alive. He was there for me when I began questioning the emptiness I felt despite all our success. He never once pushed his faith on me. He simply lived it in a way that made me curious." Her voice broke slightly. "How could you do this to him? To anyone?" One of the officers approached Alexander. "Sir, we need you to come with us to provide a statement regarding the assault. Multiple witnesses have recorded the incident." "Wait!" Alexander pleaded, turning to Noah with mounting desperation. "Please, you don't understand. I have a reputation, a company, a family. This was a terrible misunderstanding." Noah studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Alexander, I'm going to ask you a simple question. If I were really who you thought I was, just an ordinary Christian volunteer with no prestigious title or connections, would you feel the same need to apologize?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Alexander opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling for a response that everyone already knew. "That's precisely it," Noah said quietly. "You're only sorry because you discovered I have influence, not because you recognize the fundamental wrong in what you did." Whitfield ended a phone call, his expression grave. "Noah, I've spoken with the hospital board. Obviously, we'll be reconsidering our relationship with Thorne Biotechnologies immediately. But about your research funding—" Noah smiled, and it was a smile that made Alexander feel as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "James, it's interesting you should mention that. I was actually coming here tonight to discuss expanding our collaboration with the Foundation. I was considering allowing Thorne Biotechnologies access to our new neural pathway research." Alexander's heart seemed to stop. If his company lost access to the Shepherd Institute's groundbreaking research, it wouldn't just affect him personally. It would be a corporate catastrophe that would impact hundreds of careers and potentially thousands of patients. "I've been thinking," Noah continued casually, "but now I need to consider whether I want my life's work associated with a company whose CEO finds it acceptable to assault people based solely on their religious beliefs." Whitfield looked as though he might collapse. "Noah, please, this was one man acting alone. The companies and institutions involved don't share his views." "The companies promoted that one man to CEO," Noah observed. "The Foundation gave him authority to represent its values. The institutions trained him, partnered with him, evaluated him positively for years." He paused thoughtfully. "That makes me wonder what other individuals with similar biases might be in positions of leadership." Alexander finally comprehended the full magnitude of what he had done. Not only had he destroyed his own reputation, he had potentially damaged his entire company, all his colleagues, hundreds of families who depended on those jobs, and countless patients who might have benefited from the collaboration. "Please," Alexander whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I beg you. My company, my employees, my wife." Victoria stepped away from him in disgust. "Don't use me or your employees as shields for your actions, Alexander. What about all the people who could have been helped by Noah's research? They deserve better than a partner who attacks people for their faith." As the police officers prepared to escort Alexander away, Noah did something unexpected. He approached the man who had assaulted him and spoke quietly so that only Alexander could hear. "Alexander, I'm going to give you some free advice. Use this moment to truly reflect on who you are and who you aspire to be. Because the person you revealed yourself to be tonight isn't someone your employees should follow, your colleagues should trust, or your wife should have to defend." That's when the true extent of the destruction Alexander had wrought began to sink in, not just in his professional world, but in something far more fundamental and irreparable. 9 months later, Noah Shepherd walked through the pediatric wing of the new children's hospital. The building featured a modern design, with bright, welcoming spaces that helped make the medical environment less intimidating for young patients and their families. The Thorne Biotechnologies logo that once would have dominated the donor wall had been replaced by a dozen smaller contributors, none of whom had Alexander's resources, but all of whom shared a genuine commitment to the project. Thorne's stock had plummeted after the viral video of the assault, causing a cascade of consequences that resulted in Alexander being forced to resign by his board of directors. Victoria Thorne, who had filed for separation shortly after the incident, now directed her own research foundation with a focus on integrating spiritual care into treatment protocols for critically ill patients. I could no longer share my life with someone who would assault another human being over their faith, she had explained during their last conversation. The man I thought I married would never have done that. Gerald, the former event security guard, now worked as the Children's Hospital's security director, implementing a new visitor management system that emphasized both safety and dignity. Dr. Shepherd believed in me when nobody else would have given me a chance, he told his staff during orientation. Sometimes the most important thing we can offer others is just basic human respect. Noah paused in front of the hospital chapel, watching families of all faiths finding moments of peace amidst their medical challenges. His research institute now offered a pioneering program for medical students that explored the intersection of science, faith, and healing, turning that moment of conflict into a catalyst for positive change. His phone vibrated with a message from Victoria. "Noah, thank you for helping me see what true faith looks like in action. The hospital board wants to know if you're available for the grand opening ceremony next month." He smiled as he typed his response. "I wouldn't miss it. This hospital represents everything good that can happen when science and faith work together instead of against each other." A notification popped up on his phone, a news alert about Alexander Thorne. After months of professional exile, Alexander had been spotted volunteering at a homeless shelter in a different city. The article mentioned that he had declined all interviews but had been regularly attending a local church known for its reconciliation ministry. Noah stared at the photo of Alexander serving meals, the former CEO's face thinner but somehow lighter than it had been that night at the gala. He sent a quick text to his assistant. "Please find out which shelter Alexander Thorne is working with. I'd like to make an anonymous donation." When his assistant asked why, Noah simply replied, "Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us, but helping them find a better version of themselves." Alexander had tried to humiliate Noah for his faith and perceived social status, but had ended up revealing his own spiritual poverty to the world. Where arrogance had created conflict, humility was now building something new. In the quiet of the hospital corridor, Noah reflected on the words he often shared with medical students who questioned how he balanced scientific rigor with personal faith. Science asks how the world works. Faith asks why we're here to study it in the first place. The person who respects both questions will always have more answers than the one who dismisses either. Across town, in a small apartment nothing like the mansion he once owned, Alexander Thorne opened a letter that had arrived that morning. Inside was a brief note. "When you're ready to talk, I'm here." Forgiveness isn't just something we receive. It's something we learn to give ourselves. "Noah." Alexander's hands trembled as he realized that the man he had once assaulted was offering him something he had never considered possible. Not just a second chance, but a completely new way of seeing the world and his place in it. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered to the empty room, "I don't deserve this." And perhaps that was the beginning of the most important lesson of all.